What if I told you that ancient Americans may have reached Africa long before Christopher Columbus ever touched his boat and said, "Ah yes, I discovered this"? No, this is not a movie trailer. This is not a late-night conspiracy WhatsApp forward. And no, your history teacher did not cover this in class. Quick question for you. Do you really believe people thousands of years ago just looked at the Atlantic Ocean and said, too wet. Let's stay home forever"? Because here's the weird part. There are symbols, art styles, traditions, and even facial features in parts of Africa that look uncomfortably similar to ancient American cultures. I mean, very similar. Like, are we cousins or what? Similar. But hold on! I'm not explaining anything yet. Not the how, not the why, not the who. Because history has a habit of skipping chapters it doesn't know what to do with. Now pause with me for just 2 seconds. Ask yourself, what else did we never get taught? If your brain is already itching, good. That's exactly where I want it. And listen, before we go any further, if this kind of content makes your eyebrows rise even a little bit, tap the subscribe button like it owes you money. Hit the like button so hard it starts questioning its life choices. And share this with that one friend who always says, "Nah, history is deeper than that." Because in a moment, we're opening a door history quietly locked. And once you see what's inside, you may never look at maps the same way again. Let's go. All right. Let's talk about what we were taught, aka the clean, simple version of history. Growing up, history class made the Atlantic Ocean look like a giant "do not cross" sign. Teachers basically said, before Columbus, people just stared at the ocean and went back to farming. The Atlantic was presented as this impossible, scary wall. No GPS, no compass, no Google Maps saying turn left in 500 years. So the idea was simple, nobody crossed it. Period. Then enters the hero of the story, Christopher Columbus. The narrative goes like this. 1402, brave man. 3 ships. Boom, history begins. As if millions of people across the world were just on pause mode, waiting for one European sailor to press play. Now here's where it gets interesting. This version of history became mainstream not because it explained everything, but because it explained things conveniently. It was easy to teach, easy to write in textbooks, easy to use as a starting point for colonial timelines. And most importantly, it centered power, discovery, and firsts around one direction of the world. But let me ask you something. If ancient people could cross deserts, mountains, jungles, and entire continents, why do we suddenly assume the ocean was where human curiosity said, "All right, guys, that's enough adventure for today"? Even more curious, other ancient civilizations were already sailing long distances before Columbus. So why does history act like the Atlantic had a magical force field around it? I'm not saying the textbooks lied. I'm just saying they may have left some pages out. If this is already making you rethink things, drop a comment saying, And don't worry, this story is just warming up, all right? Now this is where history starts acting suspicious. Welcome to the part where you tilt your head and say, "Wait, hold on." Let's start with facial markings and symbols. Across parts of Africa and ancient America, you see the same lines, the same patterns, the same placement on the face and body. Not random doodles, not art for vibes. These markings meant identity, protection, status, spirituality. Now here's the funny part. Different continents, different textbooks, but the designs look like they came from the same group chat. Coincidence? Maybe. But let's keep going. Next, spiritual practices and rituals. Both cultures believed the spiritual world wasn't far away. It was right here. Ancestors weren't gone. They were involved, watching, advising, sometimes judging. Rituals used drums, chants, symbols, fire, and sacred spaces to connect the physical and spiritual realms. Now pause. If two totally unconnected civilizations developed the same spiritual logic, that's interesting. If they also shared how they practiced it. Then there's storytelling and oral tradition. No books, no writing everything down. Stories were memories. History passed from mouth to ear, generation to generation, using rhythm, repetition, and call and response. Sound familiar? Exactly. And finally, language and cultural echoes. Certain words, sounds, rhythms, and meanings feel related, not identical, but like accents from the same ancestral voice. Even the way stories start, end, and repeat key phrases feel connected. Now, I'm not saying someone forgot their passport and stayed behind. I'm just saying, when the symbols match, the rituals rhyme, the stories feel familiar, and the language echoes. At some point, coincidence starts asking for a lawyer. Drop a comment if any of this makes you say, "No, that's wild," because we're about to go even deeper. All right, now let's talk about oral histories and legends, aka history that didn't bother to write things down, but still remembered everything. Across many African traditions, there are stories that speak of ancestors who came from, or traveled across, the Great Water. Not the village stream, not the rainy season puddle, the big water, the kind that swallows the horizon. These stories weren't told once and forgotten. They were repeated, refined, protected, passed from elders to children like family treasure. Because in oral cultures, forgetting a story wasn't just rude, it was losing history. Now here's where it gets interesting. These legends don't sound like fairy tales about flying people or invisible dragons. They talk about boats, journeys, strange lands, encounters with unfamiliar people. Very practical stories, if you ask me. And before you say, but stories change over time. Yes, they do. But here's the funny thing. When the same core details survive across generations, regions, and languages, that's not imagination. That's memory with a strong backbone. So why does modern history often dismiss oral tradition? Simple. If it's not written in ink, stamped with a date, and stored in a museum, it's labeled unreliable, which is ironic, because some written records were literally propaganda with good handwriting. Oral history mattered because it was lived. It explained where people came from, who they were connected to, and why certain rituals existed. It wasn't just what happened, it was who we are. So when elders speak of ancestors crossing great waters, maybe they weren't guessing, maybe they were remembering. If this made you smile, nod, or squint suspiciously at your screen, drop a comment saying "Great Water," because next, we look at whether science accidentally backed up the stories. All right, now let's bring science into the conversation, because history just called physics for backup. Let's talk about ocean currents, not vibes, not myths, not trust me, bro. Actual moving water. The Atlantic Ocean isn't a still swimming pool. It's more like a giant conveyor belt that never clocks out. There are powerful currents that flow from the Americas toward Africa, slowly but consistently 24/7. No engine sounds, no fuel stops. Just nature doing overtime. Now imagine this, an ancient boat. Wooden, wind-powered. No Wi-Fi, no panic button. If it drifts into one of these currents, congratulations. You've just boarded Nature Airlines. And before you say, "That sounds impossible," here's the wild part. There are documented cases of modern boats, fishing vessels, and even debris drifting from the Americas and washing up on African shores. No GPS, no steering, just currents and patience. History loves to act like ancient people needed Google Maps to move around. They didn't. They needed wind, water, and time, and they had plenty of all three, and this wasn't some one-time accident. Once people understood the sea's behavior, wind, stars, tides, they learned how to work with it, not fight it. The ocean wasn't an enemy, it was a road. So when people say they couldn't cross the Atlantic without modern technology, the ocean quietly replies, who said anything about crossing on purpose? Nature doesn't ask for permission. It transports, it connects, it moves things whether history is ready or not. If this just changed how you see the ocean, type Nature Airlines in the comments. Because next, we're looking at physical evidence that may have washed up with the waves. All right. This is the part where historians start adjusting their glasses and clearing their throats. Welcome to Artifacts That Raise Eyebrows. Let's talk about tools, carvings, and symbols that show up on opposite sides of the Atlantic looking like they were made by the same creative cousin. Stone heads, carved faces, geometric symbols, tool designs that say, "I've seen you before, but where?" And no, this isn't ancient plagiarism. It's more like history saying, "These patterns are a little too familiar." Now, whenever these artifacts pop up, two things happen immediately. One, someone gets excited. Two, someone else gets nervous. Because these objects don't shout, they whisper. They sit quietly in museums or storage rooms, minding their business, until someone connects the dots. And once the dots connect, boom, debate mode activated. Some historians argue similar problems create similar solutions. Basically, if you give humans rocks, they'll eventually carve faces. Fair point. Others say, cultural exchange isn't impossible, just uncomfortable, because admitting contact means rewriting timelines, and textbooks don't like cardio. Then there's the third group, the silent one, the ones who say, "Interesting, but let's not jump to conclusions," which in academic language sometimes means, "Please don't mess with my career." The funny thing is, no one argues these artifacts exist. They argue about what they mean. Coincidence? Independent invention? Or proof of ancient contact that history isn't emotionally ready for? So when you see tools and symbols separated by an ocean but united by design, remember, artifacts don't lie, they just wait. If this made you laugh or raise an eyebrow, come out side-eye, because next we talk about why these ideas still make people uncomfortable today. All right. Now we've reached the awkward family dinner part of history. The moment when someone asks a question, and everybody suddenly finds the ceiling very interesting. Let's start with the first reason history avoided this topic. Written records. If it wasn't written down on paper, stamped with a date, and signed by someone wearing a serious robe, it often didn't count. Never mind oral traditions that survived for centuries. If it wasn't in ink, history said, source. Next up, colonial bias. A lot of what we call world history was written during colonial times by people who already believed they were the center of the world. So imagine writing history while thinking, "We discovered everyone. Therefore, everyone was waiting to be discovered." That mindset quietly shaped textbooks. Exploration became a one-way street. Knowledge flowed in one direction. And suddenly, complex civilizations were labeled isolated until Europe showed up with flags and paperwork. Now here's the real question. Who decides what counts as history? Is it the people who lived it, or the people who wrote it down later? Because once you start taking oral history, artifacts, and non-European perspectives seriously, things get uncomfortable. Timelines wobble, verses disappear, and the idea of discovery starts looking like a rebranding problem. And let's be honest, history isn't allergic to truth. It's allergic to inconvenient truth. Questions like, what if contact happened earlier? What if knowledge moved both ways? What if the world was connected long before we admitted it? Those questions don't break history. They just force it to stretch. If this made you laugh nervously or nod aggressively, drop a comment saying uncomfortable. Because next, we talk about what happens when history finally starts asking better questions. All right, deep breath. This is where we bring everything home. Because if all of this is even partly true, shared symbols, drifting oceans, oral memories, awkward historians, then it means one big thing. Human history is shared. Not my history versus your history. Not we discovered you. More like, oh, we've been connected this whole time. Suddenly, borders start looking a little dramatic. Lines on a map we take very seriously today were once just suggestions. The ocean wasn't a divider, it was a connector. And identity wasn't about passports. It was about people, stories, and movement. Think about it. If ancient humans could travel, trade, share ideas, and influence one another across water and time, then maybe culture isn't something that stays in one place. Maybe it travels, maybe it mixes, maybe it refuses to stay inside the boxes we drew later. And here's the funny part. We argue today like history was always neat and organized. It wasn't. Humans were curious, messy, adventurous, and sometimes just caught a lucky current. So why does asking these questions matter? Because questions don't destroy history. They upgrade it. They help us see each other less as strangers and more as relatives who forgot the family group chat password. When we ask better questions, we stop being afraid of complexity. We stop clinging to firsts like trophies, and we start appreciating connection instead of competition. So next time someone says, "That's not how history works," just smile and say, "History works better when we keep asking." If this made you rethink borders, identity, or your place in the story, comment connected. And if you enjoyed this journey, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, because history still has a few chapters it hasn't told us yet. All right, we've reached the end, but not the pack your bags and go home kind. This is the part where I don't want you to agree with me. I want you to think. You don't have to clap. You don't have to nod dramatically. You don't even have to say, "Yes, these are facts." But if this video made you pause, squint at your screen, or whisper, "Wait, what?" then mission accomplished. History doesn't grow from agreement. It grows from questions, from respectful arguments, from that one comment that starts with, "I hear you, but..." So drop your thoughts below. Disagree politely. Debate respectfully. Bring sources. Bring stories. Bring that cousin who always argues in family group chats. We welcome them too. And listen, before you scroll away like you're sneaking out of a party, hit the like button so the algorithm knows curiosity still exists. Subscribe like you're bookmarking a secret library. And share this video with someone who loves history, or someone who says, "History is boring. We need to talk to them." If you've been watching quietly this whole time, this is your moment. Comment anything, even just Atsuo. Trust me, the comment section is where history really starts arguing. And don't go far, because next episode, we're looking at evidence that makes historians uncomfortable, the discoveries that didn't make it into textbooks, and why some questions never get assigned homework. So stay curious, stay respectful, and remember, history isn't finished. It's just waiting for better questions. See you in the next one.